I came to the UK as a small child and was brought up here and come from a Muslim background. I happen to have had the benefit of a very good British education system and a close family who live in the UK. I have two adult sons from my first marriage, which ended in divorce. And several years ago, I met someone and had what you might term as a bit of a whirlwind romance, whom I later went on to marry, and I had a baby, a third child, a young boy. My husband was of European origin and Catholic and lived and worked in the Middle East for a number of years. I had always lived and worked in London, very much a Londoner, sorry. I hope that doesn't offend anyone. But as he was not keen to settle in London, he insisted that I move to the Middle East, to a particular country, so that we could live together as a family. Although he lived in an Islamic country, to me and to most people it seemed very modern, and so I agreed to move because I wanted to work with him. I was about to have a baby and I loved him, so all the reasons for moving there seemed right. However, things started to go very wrong very quickly, and I would almost characterise it as I'd say the moment I stepped on that country's soil, things started to go downhill quite rapidly, especially after I gave birth to my younger son. He was extremely unsupportive. He became very controlling and abusive. He was obsessed with spying on me and monitoring my movements. At one stage, he placed recording devices in our bedroom. He humiliated me and caused me gradually to lose self-control and identity. It was quite a demeaning experience. He didn't want me to work, and he wanted me to work in menial and low-paid jobs. Prior to marrying him, I had quite a successful career as a professional. I mean, at one stage, trying to inject a bit of humour in my speech, in a moment of madness, I actually stood to be a member of the Labour Party. So, you know, that was obviously everyone makes mistakes. So I didn't get elected, as you can see, so it's probably not a bad thing. He tried to actually force me, it was about the financial control for a while, to work in these jobs. At one stage he wanted me to work as a domestic. And he would say things like, I only had a good job in England because I had slept my way to the top. I had worked with, you know, ministers and Secretary of State, but that wasn't good enough for him. I found out one day in the house that he had, I found some evidence that he'd harassed an ex-girlfriend of his in the past, and she'd obtained a restraining order. So that frightened me, obviously, kind of a lot more, and heightened my anxiety and fear. On one occasion, I was physically assaulted by him, and I went to the police in that particular country, and you have to bear in mind I was in another country. I'll explain the reason as to why I couldn't get back here in a moment. And they told me that under Sharia law, my husband had a right to beat me and that I should have obeyed him. They had a law of chastisement, which meant that domestic violence wasn't recognised in that particular state. They told me to beg for his forgiveness, and as a consequence, I received no support or protection from the police for the abuse, and gradually his behaviour got worse. He grew more controlling, and I was obviously I had a small baby, so I was more concerned for my baby's safety than mine, because you know how it is when you're in these situations. You think, I'm an intelligent woman, I should know these things, I can cope. And things were made particularly worse because he would constantly threaten me with Sharia law, the police. He said that he would use Sharia to take my baby away from from me, sorry. It was quite a desperate and traumatic time, and I could see things were getting worse and spiraling out of control. He did quite a lot of things in that period, which I won't go into the detail about, because it's like quite sort of bad elements of the control factors. And then eventually we separated in around about April 2011. He locked me out of the family home with our one-year-old baby. I had no rights to get back into the house because as a woman in that country, I didn't own any housing rights as such. And due to the country's Islamic laws, what I didn't know at the time was that he'd placed a travel ban and he'd kept our son's passport, so I could not leave that country because the laws allowed the man to possess all the documents belonging to the child and the family. The British Embassy I had been going to for some time refused to help me and would not give me travel documentation even though I was a British citizen without permission from him. He provided no financial support, and had it not been for my family in England, I would have been destitute with a small baby. So I was stuck in this foreign country with no rights, no protection, and as a British citizen, no way of getting back home. It was sometime, I think about a year later, I discovered that my husband, he had obtained a Sharia divorce without me knowing. I couldn't understand initially the shock when I was told by my lawyer. I'm a British national. We married in London in Marylebone Registry Office. He was a white European Catholic male. And yet the Sharia courts entertained this Sharia divorce petition that I'd never seen. And there had been something like numerous hearings, I think 18, I can't remember the exact number. I went to one of them, which I'll tell you about. And so I found out in absentia that this divorce had taken place. In between, the court had arranged for me to see my son, for him to have contact with my son, but it was deemed to be, I had no housing at the time, so the only place that he could have contact was in a public park. And on that occasion also, in public, he assaulted me when, on one of the contact sessions at the time. I called the police, I called my lawyer, again nothing happened. The courts, when it came to giving testimony about domestic violence, completely disregarded that. And again, I didn't know at the time, but I suppose looking back on it, if domestic violence isn't recognised, why would that testimony have any kind of impact? After the assault, I was too terrified to go back and have contact with him. When you're with an abuser, as you will hear from many women, even now talking about him sends my sort of nervous system into complete disarray internally. And so I fled to the only refuge in that country, which was run by the state, and it was a government-run refuge. And this is the refuge, if I could show you pictures of it. It was next to the Central Immigration Jail with bars on the windows. And I wasn't allowed a phone, everything was monitored, and my husband was allowed to visit me in the refuge, which he did, and he abused me on one occasion. And then on one occasion, I witnessed an Indian lady. She had experienced a relationship breakdown, and she was dragged out by the police. It's the police that guards the refuge. She'd been guarded because her husband accused her of being mentally insane or something like that. So all that time I was in the refuge, I had this, I felt I was being imprisoned. And then I saw another form of oppression and what happened to the woman. And all of that had sort of built a picture and an impression on me that I was not safe at the refuge. I mean, certainly by that time, I had felt quite overwhelmed and unsupported by both the legal system, my lawyers, and particularly frightened about what the police. So in desperation and in order to try and get protection, I fled from that refuge to get away from his abuse. Despite what had happened, the court still expected me to continue the contact visits and take my son to the park. I went into hiding, so therefore the visits did not take place. In the time that I was in hiding, what I didn't know is he had made numerous false, what they call cases, and reports about me. These cases ranged on a number of things: kidnapping. I'd been accused of kidnapping. I'd been accused of defamation, libel, and quite a lot of things had happened to me in that period. I was arrested on one occasion. I was put in police custody for 6 hours with a young baby in a Middle Eastern jail with 40-degree heat, with no water, no food, no nothing. And when I did complain about it, I was assaulted by a prison guard, a female prison guard, which still impacts on me to this day. So what happened was that he had basically used the Sharia court system to harass, humiliate and denigrate me. And the contents of the divorce, the actual sort of details without going into it, is he'd managed to get a divorce and managed to construct a case to have my son taken away from me because I had been immoral and un-Islamic. I was an apostate because I'd visited India. He'd shown pictures of me in the past where I had worn Western dress. So I was painted as this un-Islamic. I think one of them is I drank liquor with men. That was a phrase that was used. So all these things were put in the judgment itself. I wasn't given any notice of hearings, so I wasn't given a fair trial. And although I had a lawyer, I had an Arabic lawyer, I think the only word she possibly could speak was khalas, inshallah. And those were the two words that kind of, ruminate in my head all the time. So I didn't engage in those proceedings, and I wasn't able to engage in the proceedings like you would here. My husband was well connected to the local police officers and often used his connections throughout the various proceedings. In fact, in the actual divorce itself, because it was a Sharia divorce, the people that gave testimony were two police officer friends, the same police officers that had dismissed my complaints of domestic violence, had turned up at the court. I had no witnesses because I didn't know any men in that country. So I could not have participated again in the hearing when the custody was granted. So there was no cross-examination. It was almost a threat, a fait accompli. And after the hearing, my husband then came out and then threatened me on the steps of the court. And again, nothing could be done about it. So the divorce happened I think a year later after we'd separated. It was given in absentia, and he'd made a number of allegations and a number of false claims within the divorce process. Whilst I was in hiding, I didn't have any support from anyone. I had no contact with my family for a while. I had no contact with the embassy. And as we were in hiding, what I didn't know is my husband had started, and remember he was quite an obsessive, controlling person. He had been making a lot of effort into finding us. And at one stage, actually, he placed me on an Interpol register. I don't have any proof of it. That's what I was told by the court. And then he found out where we were living in 2013, and he snatched my son out of the playground. And you know, that's like the worst day of my life. In that moment in time, I just wanted the ground to open up and swallow me. And I found out, which is it got worse. He snatched him when I wasn't there. Unfortunately, that day I had really bad health. I had an allergy attack, and I don't know if I could have done anything if I was there. But afterwards, I found out that he obviously told me that he'd had this order to have my son removed by the Sharia court, and I had no rights to see my son, and I had lost all the rights to the appeal, and I was denied any contact, and I didn't have a lawyer. And the embassy, I think the embassy for once, for the 3 years that I'd suffered this tragic, suddenly they found their moral compass and backbone. And it's only after my son was taken that they decided to give me a bit of help by coming with me to the courts. And so they found out from the Sharia court that I had lost the right to appeal. They came to court with me. And afterwards, I'm going to quickly summarise because I know the speakers later. I then, to my horror, found that I'd be put on trial for kidnapping my son. So if that wasn't enough, I was about to go to jail for, I think the maximum sentence was 3 years. So the trial happened. And even on the day of the trial, I wasn't allowed to speak. He told the judge various things about me. And I again tried to tell the judge that I had been a victim of domestic violence. There was this restraining order. There was all sorts of things. But again, I wasn't allowed an audience. I wasn't allowed a voice. He was. So he was allowed to give evidence. And then what happened was, on that day actually, I'd been arrested so many times. By that time I was desensitized and numbed. I was arrested that day and placed in the cell in front of journalists from Sky TV. So, you know, I can only look back on it and think that was all because of what he could do as a man in that country with the contacts he had. I was ultimately found guilty and given a suspended sentence. And although I appealed against it, I was unsuccessful. Although the embassy said to me, it could have been worse, you could have been put in jail, but we'll come and visit you. So, you know, it's a very kind of bizarre way of helping a, British citizen. In April 2014, I was forced to leave the Middle East without my son, because I was told that there were further warrants out for my arrest based on my husband's allegations. It was quite a hard choice. I was devastated to obviously leave that country knowing that I may never see my son again, but it was a choice between staying there and being imprisoned and not seeing him at all, or, as my family said, to come back to England to the relative safety and protection of the UK. When I came back, I heard from my lawyers that I was granted some supervised contact, but only if I go back to that country. And I think it's probably clear to most people why I haven't gone back since. There's no protection for me. I mean, I would be arrested. And I'd be arrested more so because I've been speaking out about that particular country and its laws and so forth. I think in terms of just finishing off now, and thanks for keeping with me because it's very difficult to, it's the first time I've publicly spoken about it. I think the abuse from my husband was one thing, and I don't make any excuses for that. But his abuse was made much, much worse by the state laws and by the state. and I think by both states actually. It's not just that particular country, but by also the British government, who've also, I feel, endorsed domestic violence. I mean, I have a phrase, say, domestic violence has no borders. Just because I left the protection of the UK, relative protection of the UK, doesn't mean that I should have had no protection as a woman and as a British subject. I haven't seen my son in 3 years. I still obviously feel it's very raw, and I live with that daily reminder of the trauma, which is why I'm very grateful to SBS, who are helping and supporting me a lot, and other interested parties are as well. And I just want to say, I mean, I've campaigned about Sharia law, and not only on my own case, but on a wider subject about domestic violence. I feel very strongly that women, I mean, I have to talk about from a British woman's perspective, that go abroad to these countries, whether you're going as a tourist or to settle, that they need to be aware about the evils of Sharia. I mean, it's the only way I can explain it, the evils of Sharia law, and how these Sharia states do not recognise domestic violence as a crime against women. And by campaigning, I have managed to get some success from the Foreign Office, who changed some travel advice for women going to a particular country and saying, well, you might be the subject of Sharia custody laws if you get into a dispute. It's unfortunate that they haven't gone further than that, but I'm hoping that through this sort of wider work, there is some more recognition. So I'm shocked that we're having the debate to allow Sharia courts to operate in this country. I think I'm very proud of being a British person. I love Britain, you know, and so forth. I think we've done a lot to progress women's rights. A lot of organisations and grassroots organisations have helped that. But why should I have to be at the mercy of a parallel legal system? I come back here and I find that my Sharia divorce is actually recognised across European countries. To me, that isn't right. It gives me no rights at all. And as an Asian woman, I don't want to be treated as a second-class citizen and given less protection because of some guided conception at multiculturalism. At a time we should be helping other countries improve human rights, because actually at the end of the day it's a human rights issue. We cannot allow, I don't think, whether it's Sharia courts, any religious laws, to actually control women's lives and outcomes in this way. I just want to say that, to end with, that it's a personal thing. At many times I always thought, I know people in my family, I'm doom and gloom and so forth, but I always thought I would get out of that country in a box. So it is, I don't know, a miracle, by some miracle, you know, when you use the word to survive, somehow I've survived it. I don't know how. But I guess it is a testament to something out there, or the universe, that I'm here to be able to share this story with you, to warn other women and to hopefully ensure that the inquiry takes account of experiences like mine to change things. Thank you.
Wow.